Alrighty, we are live. Let me know in the chat room if you can see and hear okay, and we'll jump right into it. We have a lot, as I always say, to cover. We're going to talk about the electric universe tonight. A couple of touch points back to yesterday's live stream on Sapphire, which is tied into the whole plasma discussion, the fourth state of matter. Want to say welcome to everyone in the chat room here, and Doug Diamond from Diamond Digital Media, who makes all this happen. Need any tech support of any sort? Doug is your man, and he's been indispensable in keeping me on the air for now 18 plus months. I'm also joined this evening by my lovely wife, Kathleen, off camera, but she is moderating in the chat room for us this evening. And I think this is a new addition to our chat room. I want to put out a special welcome to David from Manila, where he says he's just awakening for the day in the morning. So welcome, David. We have Pamela in here, Sherry, Eileen, and who else? Oh, and Andy's here, of course. All right, everybody's here. And it sounds like you guys can see and hear everything all right. And we'll just jump right into it. And Susan's here, just made it. Excellent, very good. Wanted to say special prayers again. I won't give a name, but one of our patrons who had surgery yesterday is recovering today, and we heard that she's doing very well. Some concerns post-surgery, so please, prayers for special healing and for test results to come back negative, which is a positive. Isn't that interesting? But certainly that she comes up with a clean bill of health on the pending test results. And as always, anyone else that has any prayerful needs, any prayer requests, we are more than happy to receive those by email and to add you to our prayer list. That's what we're all about here. This is fellowship. This is witnessing for the Lord. This is bringing others to the Lord. We weave in the science as the evidence of evil, but as we started yesterday, we're taking a benevolent look at things in terms of science. We took a look at the Sapphire project of Monty Childs and his team, and they are closely linked and associated with tonight's topic, which is the Thunderbolts project and the electric universe model. And what I'm really going to do tonight is a slideshow. I have a ton of notes that I've written up for today. And as I began the process after compiling my notes of compiling images for tonight's teaching, it occurred to me as I kept adding more and more of these that we may only have time for the slideshow as an introduction. And then Sunday, I think I will dive deep into my notes that I compiled. And it took me most of the day to put this together because the body of information produced by the Thunderbolts project, whom I am not an official spokesperson of any sort, of any manner. I don't really have any connections with them. But if you will, I'm a follower of their scientific research, and these are scientists. These are engineers and physicists and cosmologists, astronomers that are all associated with the Thunderbolts project, who are doing real science, but they're doing it outside of the dogma of the mainstream science. And the big divergent point that I will share with you as we go through this concerns the theory, and underscore the word theory, because that's all it is, the theory of the Big Bang. And associated with the Big Bang and that theory, there's thunder just went off as I'm saying Big Bang. Thunder from our thunderstorms here in New Hampshire all day just boomed out. Thank you, Lord. I know you have a great sense of humor. It's kind of like, the drums, bada-ding, and hit the cymbals, right? So Big Bang is a gravitational model, what I call the Einstein, to put a label on it, the Einstein model of the universe. The Thunderbolts electric model of the universe, I put a face to that in the form of Tesla. but he's not unique in this. It just makes it easy because they're familiar figures. Thunderbolts does not adhere. In fact, they have provided a lot of evidence, scientific, factual, measurable, detectable, reproducible evidence that the Big Bang is nothing more than a theory. There's nothing to it. Okay, probably Sunday I'll get into talking about the redshift. I know that there was a question about the redshift about 3 or 4 live streams ago, and I want to go ahead and address that in the context of the electric model of the universe, because it's really the redshift that debunks the whole idea, the whole notion of the continuing expansion because of a Big Bang of the universe. There is no expansion. There is no Big Bang. You know that I've never been an adherent of the Big Bang model, and it's because of the work of the Thunderbolts Project that really enlightened me to this and the understanding of it, along with a lot of other research. So what I'm going to do is start with scripture, as we always do, and we're going to go through a slideshow tonight. And of course, I will add in my notes just quickly on these to give you an overview of where this all germinated from, this idea of an electric universe as presented by the Thunderbolts Project. So without further ado, let's go to our first slide. You'll recall from yesterday's live stream, this is an image of the anode, the positively charged iron ball that's in the center point of the sphere, the spherical iron ball that's at the center of the Sapphire Project's chamber. So I offer that to you again with Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. So what we try to present to you are things that are truthful. When it's conjecture, when it's theory on my part, I label it as so. I make it very clear. But we are trying to operate in a courtroom environment many times as presenting the evidence of evil. Tonight, I'm not necessarily presenting the evidence of evil. I'm showing you truth. I believe the electric model of the universe more completely, more logically, more intuitively, and even evidentiary of what I'm going to share with you on an evidentiary basis is factual science. It's not theory, it's not conjecture. But woven in here is some of the mythos of the golden age of Kronos, and I will make it very clear when I'm relating to the myth or the mythos, but it is backed up by physical evidence. So it's an interesting mix that we're going to see tonight. Pardon me if you hear the thunder in the background, but God's playing his drums again. All righty, so let's go on to quick review. This is Sapphire. This is their chamber that we presented yesterday, Monty Childs. Just touch points just to give you some continuity in the discussion of electric universe. And this is the team at Sapphire. Just going to march through this just to kind of refresh you a little bit very quickly. Okay? Because we have a lot of slides to cover. And I just want to give this again to you so you have just kind of a leaping off point. Talking about plasma. Plasma is the fourth state of matter. You have solid matter, you have liquid, and you have a gas. Plasma is a fourth state of matter. As I was saying to Kathleen earlier today, we were discussing this at lunch about plasma. And according to the scientists at the Thunderbolts Project, the Electric Universe Project, if you will, they assign a number to what comprises most of the universe, and that is 99% of the universe is comprised of plasma, the fourth state of matter. The remaining 1% is the physical, solid matter, liquid, and gas. So what I would offer to you is kind of almost a 180, but in a good way, a 180 to what is professed by mainstream science. And that is that they state in the gravity model of the universe, not the electric universe, EU, the gravitational Big Bang expanding universe model, they've assigned 85% of the universe to dark matter and dark energy. Again, the Thunderbolt scientists just make a huge definitive statement backed up by evidence, in fact, that there is no such thing as dark matter and dark energy. And yet, even though it's never been measured, never been detected, and thereby measured and reproducible, dark matter and dark energy is, according to mainstream dogma, 85% of the known universe. Whereas the Thunderbolt scientists say that 99% of the universe is plasma. That means that 1% is solid matter, liquid, and gas. That most of the universe is in the fourth state of matter. Oftentimes, plasma is described by mainstream science as a transitory state, transitioning from solid to liquid to gas, or from liquid to gas, or from gas back to liquid and back to solid. Those transitions between those three primary states of matter. And yet, it is the complete 180 of that. Plasma is the predominant state. It's not transitory. It's the predominant state of the universe. And I don't know if you can hear it or not, but our trees outside the window are just absolutely going crazy. We may lose our power here, folks. This is the strongest wind I've ever seen here. We have horizontal rain outside the window, and I would say that it's blowing about 60 to 70 or...
Yeah, well, tell them to that they better pray.
Yeah, pray against
right
the elements
now, in the name of Jesus, we just speak to this storm, which is significant. I'm going to go pray outside. Hold on.
Yeah. I've never seen the rain like this, the wind this strong here in New Hampshire. I would say this is 60 to 70 mile an hour winds, just a ballpark visual estimate, judging by the effect on the trees, the thunder and lightning that we're having. Yeah, pretty amazing, pretty amazing. We're blessed to have a very strong home here. Just incredible. But my apologies up front if we lose power. It's very likely we will lose power with this kind of a storm. Our power lines are above ground in the area, and therefore it's not unusual for a tree to take us out. Pretty interesting. Here we are talking about...
I just watered my plants.
Yeah, I told you not to.
You know you did.
All right, so with that little aside...
That was significant.
Let's jump right into the slideshow. And again, I'm going to just march through these slides, but I'll weave in my comments here. And again, I apologize if the rain is too loud on our rooftop here. It's just something we're having to deal with. Okay, so this is the mythos. That's some pretty good lightning. The myth of the golden age of Kronos, Kronos being Saturn. Originally a brown dwarf star, Saturn's outer egg-like plasma sheath reflected its dark light inward to produce a uniform dim purple glow on the Earth. Light from outside stars could not be seen on Earth at this time. So what we see here is at the top is Saturn, in the middle is Mars, and at the bottom of this is Earth. Now bear in mind this configuration, because as we move through the slides, you're going to see this arrangement of Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and the Earth, picturing it from the top to the bottom. The story goes that enveloped in this egg-shaped plasma sheath, Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze comes to mind. I think he was referencing this myth of the golden age of Kronos. But outside of our solar system, away from the electromagnetic attraction of the sun, not gravitational, because we're talking about electric model, which means electromagnetism is the predominant mechanism of the universe, that it's not the effects of the gravitational pull of the sun, but it is the electromagnetic pull of the sun. What we're looking at here in this slide is predating the arrival of Saturn, Mars, and the Earth in the present solar system, before it was affected by our sun. The story is that these three, Saturn, Mars, and the Earth, moved through the cosmos and eventually arrived at our solar system, and did come under the electromagnetic attraction of the sun. And then some changes began to take place. Okay? Now, I should cite Immanuel Velikovsky, Collision of Worlds, his book. That was one of the epiphanies of Wallace Thornhill and Wal Thornhill in reading Velikovsky's 1950 work. And many of you have heard of Velikovsky and the Collision of the Worlds in his other books. And this is where this mythos was first brought up to David Talbot and Wal Thornhill, the founders of the Thunderbolts Project. It's funny, we're talking thunderbolts, and we've got thunder and lightning and hail and wind and all kinds.
Huge tree branch. You know the men's orange dumpster?
It dropped into it?
Tree fell over it. It's covering it now.
It's funny.
Huge.
Yeah. I don't doubt it. That was 60, 70 mile an hour horizontal rain.
I might even see a funnel out there.
Yep. Okay, so this is, I just love God's sense of humor. Thunderbolts, and he's got thunderbolts outside our window tonight. There's no fear here. This is just God's entertainment, okay? All right, so solar polar configuration. What I'm showing here is an adaptation from, again, like Velikovsky, one of the primary formulators of the electric model of the universe was Hans Alfvens. That's A-L-F-V-E-N-S. Hannes, H-A-N-N-E-S, Hannes Alfvens, A-L-F-V-E-N. He and Velikovsky really were the progenitors of the EU model. What we're illustrating here, I'll take it apart. We've got Saturn's plasma sheath in purple again. We have what are known as Birkeland currents, and I'll get into describing those. We have Saturn in the middle, producing Birkeland currents up and out of the northern pole of Saturn, and also coming around up through the southern pole of Saturn. And that is important because later on I'm going to show you the northern and southern poles of Saturn as they relate to Birkeland currents. Below Saturn is Mars, and connecting by way of electrical Birkeland currents, we have Saturn connected to Mars, connected to the Earth by way of these electrical conduits. Okay? Here's a schematic of what we're showing, and that is, again, Saturn and Venus and Mars and Earth. The Saturn Golden Age polar configuration. Everything is electrically connected here. And today, the planets remain electrically connected within our solar system. Okay? So again, this is just an overview. This is just an introduction. I think that visuals are the easiest way to present what is really a distillation of a tremendous amount of information on the electric universe. A lot of details will come on Sunday. Anthony Peratt was probably the third. We have Alfvens, and we have Velikovsky, and then we have Anthony Peratt involved in this advancement of the idea of the electric universe. This is a laboratory photograph of an experiment that Peratt did utilizing plasma. Much like the Sapphire experiment, But what you see here, rather than an anode in the center, is a ball of plasma. And these are electrical insulators, top and bottom, and an electrical charge that is passing through there. Top and bottom, Birkeland currents. Okay? So Peratt was showing this, and be mindful of this image, and I'll probably reproduce it again, repeat it again further on in the slideshow, because you're going to see this in a most unexpected place. Okay? Here again we're comparing, this is Peratt's plasma ball, and we have Sapphire's anode here, okay, without any electricity added to it, 1800 watts. And then from the Sapphire plasma chamber, between 2 and 10 million transient spikes, 2 million to 10 million watts as an output with an input of 1800. All right, so this is where this plasma ball from Anthony Peratt is going to come into the golden age of Kronos mythos. This is a representation of ancient man, Stone Age man, if you will. And I'll go ahead and blow that up, move these out of the way for the moment, and enlarge this for you, because I'd like you to look at the lower right-hand corner of this image. And this is depicting stone carvings. Carvings that represent what man is observing with the naked eye on Earth. This is a representation of ancient man on the Earth observing now Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, and Mars, all in alignment with the Earth, connected by Birkeland currents, with the Sun having been obscured by Saturn. Okay? Notice the similarity here and here, up these two half spheres or upended bowls, if you will, to what Peratt produced in the laboratory. Plasma with Birkeland currents, electrical currents. Same thing that ancient man viewed in the heavens of the Earth, because Saturn had come into close enough proximity to the Earth. And this is really the big takeaway here. Saturn was so close to the Earth and to the Sun, because this represents the time when the electromagnetic attraction of the Sun had captured Saturn and Mars and the Earth and brought them into alignment with Jupiter, Venus, in addition to Saturn and Mars and the Earth. You now have an alignment of planets, all electrically connected through Birkeland currents directly to the Earth itself. So a direct electrical connection between Saturn and the Earth, passing through these other planets, recorded on stones, recorded on cave drawings, and I'll show you a few of those in a moment. Here's a close-up of what they were observing in the sky. Here is a cross-section of what would be considered a donut. If you took a donut and laid it horizontal and then cut it in half, you would be observing the cross-section of that donut ring. That is known as a toroidal field. I mentioned that yesterday with respect to CERN, and I'll probably repeat that later on in the program here. But that donut here, this toroidal field, which is a magnetic donut shape, many of you are familiar with this. If you were to slice it and cut it, here you have the cross section that they're seeing in the heavens. So between the Earth and these planets was a donut-shaped toroidal field resulting from the Birkeland currents. And we'll define those Birkeland currents a little bit in just a second. They reproduced what they saw in the heavens, so to speak, in the sky, on the cave walls. That was the most unusual that I was just mentioning. This is ancient man. This is just kind of a composite. Maybe this is Stonehenge, but this is a artist rendition of what they were viewing in the daytime sky, not just the nighttime sky. Think of Jacob's ladder with the Birkeland currents here. Okay. I can hear the sirens in the background. There must be trees that have fallen and knocked something over.
Or fallen on someone's
Roof or power lines. Yeah, with that kind of... We virtually live in the trees here, folks, so I'm sure there are plenty of trees that have come down, unfortunately. Our prayers go out to anyone that's been affected by that windstorm. It's calmed down now. Your prayers were answered. Thank you. What I'm showing you here are cave drawings. Arizona, Armenia, Guyana, Spain, United Arab Emirates, Italy, and they're found in many other places. The South American region, Central American, China, all over the world in caves, we are seeing these drawings of what they observed in the heavens, and they tend to be anthropomorphic. They tend to look like humans because this was ancient man trying somehow to come to terms with what they were observing in the heavens, which is this purple image in the upper left-hand corner. Okay? So this is physical proof, physical evidence that they are observing some sort of electrical phenomenon in the sky. Again, this is more representations now in color of those same images. And this is what Wal Thornhill really was drawn to when he began to research this. And I know David Talbot was involved in it also. And they began to see this cave drawing evidence and the work of Anthony Peratt in the laboratory. And they put two and two together and began to dive deep into this. Here's another image of that same connection, represented by Native American, Alaskan, and Northwestern Native Americans of totem poles. Again, representing what they're seeing in the heavens. Rather compelling evidence. And also they had carved in these Native American indigenous people, they had carved this into rocks as well as caves. Okay? Here we're seeing the Babylonian representation of what they saw in the heavens, seeing what appears to be like a star, but really it's an alignment of the planets. So this is the Babylonian star of Ishtar, the planet Venus. Again, we have Saturn, Jupiter, and Venus, and Mars in alignment with the Earth. And so Venus coming into a blocking formation, if you will. This is representing Venus in white, which is Saturn in being dimmed, and Mars is in red. Okay, so you have Venus in this crescent shape that is blocking Saturn. And then Mars, because it's in close alignment and proximity to the Earth from the viewpoint, is seen in red, much closer and much larger. In the Egyptian white crown, and this is kind of a blurry image, but this is familiar to many of you, the crowns of the Egyptian pharaohs, the kings and queens, so to speak, were representative of what the ancients had seen in the heavens. They were seeing this alignment. This is a representation, the crown, if you will, in ancient Egypt, and represented in their carvings, in their statues, in their hieroglyphic drawings, representing their crowns, representing what they saw in the heavens. This is the crown of Mithra. Okay, a different configuration here of what they're seeing in the heavens. Earth, Mars, and then Venus represented in the headdress. And the crowns of European kings and queens represented Saturn. Okay, this is familiar to you, the Eye of Ra, the Eye of Horus, as it's also referred to. Here is Saturn in the middle, the inverted crescent. Okay, the inverted crescent was that plasma bowl. Okay, and also that partial blocking of the sun and the partial blocking of Saturn itself. You see Venus with a cometary tail, because Venus was observed as a comet when it broke away from its origin, which is Saturn. Venus was produced by way of cataclysm, was born from, if you will, from Saturn. And as it moved away from Saturn, there was this debris trail, this comet trail, that resulted until Venus came to a fixed orbit that we find it in today. So this is a transition to that orbit depicted. And then the polar plasma tower, the sword here of Mars. Again, that plasma conduit here represented as a tower. I call it a plasma conduit. And I'll make reference to that when we talk more about Saturn. So this is the view from the Earth looking up to the south pole of Saturn and Mars. And we're going to build towards more discussion on that. Here are some close-ups of the actual cave drawings, again depicting what they saw in the heavens. So here you are seeing the spiral, which is the cross-section of Birkeland currents. And I'm going to define that for you, but I'm just mentioning it again. You're seeing the cross-section in the heavens of this conduit as if it were cut and viewed end on. Again, these drawings here of what they're seeing. Man visualizing the Birkeland currents in the heavens. So here we are with Saturn. This is the northern pole. Many of you have seen this. These are images from Hubble and then from Cassini, the probe or satellite, but more accurately a probe that overflew the northern pole of Saturn. You see the classical hexagonal shape of Saturn. And you have here rotating clouds of plasma, and they're contra-rotating. They move in one direction on the inner circle, and the outer circle moves in the opposite direction. Here's an animation of that, a GIF of the movement of these plasma gases and electrical charges. A black and white version of the same thing where you can see these dots have been added to this just to highlight, but you can see that you have contra-rotating clouds of energy and particles. Plasma rotating in opposite directions. What you're seeing is the cross-section of Birkeland currents as viewed looking down on the northern pole of Saturn. This is a naturally occurring particle accelerator. This is a synchrotron particle accelerator. This is CERN on steroids, if you will. Produced by this synchrotron, the northern pole of Saturn, are Birkeland currents that penetrate into the core of the planet from the northern pole, originating from the northern pole, moving through the core of the planet, and then terminating at the southern pole. As you view it here, this is the spiral that is observed by Cassini and by Hubble at the southern pole of Saturn. Two different representations of it. Again, the cross-section of Birkeland currents that are passing through from the northern pole to the southern pole of Saturn. Here's a representation of Birkeland currents. On the left, you're seeing Birkeland currents, a diagram of the electrical charged particles resulting in photographically as a spiral. Up at the top, you're seeing the northern pole of Birkeland currents represented photographically below it. Okay? Now, to the details on Birkeland currents. You see here electrical currents. These are oppositely charged particles, particles that are positive and particles that are negative. They naturally form into a helix, just like DNA. Naturally occur, naturally form into a double-stranded helical arrangement. Okay? So these are filaments of current or plasma cables. This is why I call Birkeland currents a conduit, an electrical conduit. These rings are constricting magnetic fields, very much like you find as the rings of Saturn. Okay? Again, here's the cross-section now of the Birkeland current, a bottom view, which is the southern pole of Saturn, and the Birkeland currents represented here, and then just the northern pole as it's moving. This is a close-up of the double filaments. It just shows you the conventional current flow. So it's moving up through here, and then the magnetic lines of force, the magnetic fields that are naturally occurring. This is the essence of the electric model of the universe. This is showing you how moving through the plasma, electrical charges, electrons, how particles with charge state can move through the cosmos. Here are Birkelands viewed by Hubble in the cosmos. These are conduits that are light years apart. These aren't just short little strands of electrical current. These occur naturally throughout the cosmos and connect planetary systems and star systems. Counter-rotating clouds at Saturn's northern pole carry electrical power over great distances, some distances over light years in length. Again, a close-up, as viewed by Hubble, of these actual currents moving through the plasma of the cosmos. Plasma is a naturally occurring conductive material. Here's another image of Birkeland currents moving through in light years in length through the heavens. Here on Earth, we can observe Birkeland currents as the northern lights, naturally emanating, not as lightning, but emanating as electrical charges from the Earth itself because of the northern and southern poles forming the magnetosphere. Our shields, you will find Birkeland currents extending out into the heavens. Now, yesterday I showed you this plasmoid with the electron beam going out one pole and the ion beam going out the other. This is an image of what occurs inside the sapphire plasma chamber that is modeling the sun. See, the sun is not operating in isolation. It's part of this plasma system, and it is drawing power from the plasma of the cosmos, drawing power from the plasma and perpetuating its production of heat and light and ultraviolet energies, producing Birkeland currents. Now, many have not heard this before, but I'll make this statement. If we sent probes of appropriate design and capability to the northern and southern poles of the sun, we would find exactly what I just showed you on Saturn. We would find contra-rotating clouds of plasma, a naturally occurring synchrotron. At the northern pole, that hexagon, we would see at the northern pole of the sun, and we would see the spiral at the southern pole of the sun. They haven't shown us that. But if what is happening at Saturn is representative of what happens to all stars and all planets, then logic says we would, sending the appropriate probes to the northern and southern poles of the sun, we would see those configurations of the Birkeland currents. It's just physics. Again, showing you the simple diagram of the alignment of the planets connected by the plasma conduit of Birkeland currents. This is representative of what man was seeing in the heavens. Again, and the Bible records this, the Birkeland currents, as Jacob's ladder. Just to show you again, just to kind of repeat and refresh, reinforce. This is what they were seeing in the heavens. Another view of that with the purple haze of the plasma envelope. Again, Saturn trapped by the sun's electromagnetic attraction, resulting in the alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, and Mars with the Earth. And then eventually this broke apart, this separated in the resulting orbits of the planets we see in our solar system today. Now Venus, like I was just saying about the sun, this is a representation of what's going on at the northern pole of Venus. This holds true for Saturn as well, and would hold true for the sun. Okay? These spiraling arms of this particular galaxy is demonstrating to you electrically how star systems are born and how galaxies are born. This is showing you the plasma in its coalesced, in its condensed form. So let's talk about, I'll leave this image up, let's talk about black holes for just a moment, just a little sidebar. Thunderbolt's project, the scientists there, completely debunk the notion of black holes. Because, as I have said many times, and I'm representing their statements as well, is that black holes have never been detected, never been measured, never been reproduced. They've never been proven. Black holes are mathematical theories. And one of the last papers, perhaps the very last paper that Einstein published, he disavowed that black holes even existed. Okay? So these were something that even Einstein doubted in his last paper, that black holes even existed. But that was swept under the rug because greed took over. I said this yesterday in the live stream. Those in a position of power and greed, the bankers and industrialists, saw an opportunity to make money by pushing the gravitational Einstein model of the universe. Einstein even acknowledged that the electric explanation of how the universe operated, electromagnetism, was the true answer to how the universe operated. But that was swept under the rug so that they could enslave mankind in the generation of electricity, the transmission of electricity, and the use of electricity that they could charge for. Okay? Because if they acknowledged the electric model of the universe, and as Tesla was trying to share with the world, the plasma, he called it the ether, the plasma could be tapped for unlimited 0 point, as it's known today, 0 point energy. So they pushed upon humanity this whole idea of gravity being responsible for the underlying mechanism of how everything in the cosmos, everything on this planet operates. To let the cat out of the bag, Schrodinger's cat, if you will, that it was an electric model, an electric universe, people would eventually discover, researchers would discover what Tesla was trying to reveal to the world and trying to build and distribute to the world, was this ability to transmit electricity through the ionosphere and be able to tap that energy. And there would be virtually no cost to that energy. And as I said yesterday, imagine what our lives would be like if we had an unlimited, freely obtainable source of electrical energy. It would change everything. And this is why in mainstream science today, there's such a violent pushback against the Thunderbolts researchers, against the electric model. But enough of the older group of scientists have passed on, and newer scientists coming up through the ranks, so to speak, are open-minded enough to be able to look at the electric model. They begin to push for zero-point energy, for free energy. But there's an awful lot in the established world right now, as I said when I was talking about the Sapphire Project and its ability to produce eventually devices that are small enough to be included in every home, and really, in essence, nearly free energy, electrical energy, producing more than is input, supplying more energy. That they're going to try to introduce that in a phased-in manner so as not to be too disruptive to the existing structure of electrical generation, transmission, and consumption. One of the things that I'd like to point out is that in science, in the universities specifically, talking about the newer generations coming along, and that maybe there's a glimmer of hope that we can move to the electric model. The unfortunate thing, as you know, that happens in the university settings is students are rewarded for memorizing facts and figures and repeating the dogma of the day. What ends up happening physiologically and psychologically is that the blinders go on and they become predominantly left-brained, predominantly analytical, good at memorizing and at reproducing what they've memorized. Very good at that. But to the extent that it shuts down the right brain and the ability to, as we like to say here, fly at 30,000 feet, 40,000 feet in some cases on patch air and see the big picture and be critical thinkers, independent thinkers. That critical thinking and that independent thinking, taking off the blinders, requires right brain thinking. And it requires left brain thinking. It requires an equal balance of both hemispheres of the brain. We need to be right-brained and analytical and logical, but at the same time left-brained and open-minded and inquisitive, imaginative, inventive. So, if you will, psychologically, the scientists that are locked in the dogma of mainstream science almost can't help themselves because they have been literally trained in the university settings and then in their laboratory, private and governmental laboratory projects, to only think in that right-brained manner. In the left-brain manner, in the analytical. To be purely, predominantly left-brained. Good at memorizing facts and figures, but keeping the blinders on. And so it's almost as if we're asking too much of them to be open to an electric model, because they're literally in their profession and in their thinking, they're stuck in that dogma of the gravitational model, the Einstein model, and they've held up Einstein as some sort of godlike figure in the world of science. And this whole thing about relativity, which was just a theory, you need to understand, to underscore that Einstein was a dreamer. He was a theoretician. He was producing theories and translating his imagination into mathematical equations, still all theoretical. It's important to understand that mathematics is theoretical. It is the domain of the theoretical physicist and the theoretical particle physicist. It is not until you get into the experimental as a physicist, as a particle scientist, into the experimental, that you take off of the blackboard, if you will, take off the paper, the mathematics, and produce them as something tangible. This is what Monty Childs and his team have done with the theories of the electric model universe, and experimentally, tangibly built out the physical machinery, the devices, to be able to prove or disprove the theories that they had. This is why Sapphire is so strategically connected with the Thunderbolts project and the overall model of the electric model of the universe, the EU. Because they're proving in the laboratory what I just showed you in these images that had occurred in the mythos of Saturn, the golden age of Kronos. That it moved through the cosmos and then electromagnetically was captured by the sun, and this temporary alignment that was observed of the planets eventually becoming disrupted and resulting in the orbits they're in today. This is all relatively recent. So what do I mean by recent? Let me define that. What kind of historical timeline are we looking at here? We're talking about the age of man. Now, I am of the thought or the camp of the creationist in saying that the earth is really, as man has known it, as the human age of man, the human time frame of man, of only about 6,000 years for man. Possibly only 6,000 years for the earth. Now, I won't get into this, but there's also a theory that there was a first earth, a primordial earth, and then a cataclysm, and then the earth was remade, and then we had the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve as the second earth. But that's another story for another time. If we're dealing with just defining the human experience with the electric model of the universe, with the alignment of the planets and the plasma conduit, the Birkeland currents connecting all of the planets together, I mean Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and the Earth, that's in the human experience timeline. That's a very short, and if you will, in a cosmological, in a geological or archaeological viewpoint, that's a very young scenario, a very recent scenario. That's a paradigm changer. That steps markedly away from mainstream science, who still tries to tell us that, the earth is millions and millions of years old, and that we had, dinosaurs, which we did, but they were millions of years old, that we had this evolution of man from, the pond scum up through the great apes and on into the evolution of man today. Completely false. But that's the dogma. Okay? They don't want people to know the truth, because the truth sets you free. They don't want us free. They want us to be trapped in a singular way of viewing things, their way, which is a system of control. And we've discussed this at length many times before. So I'm going to refer to some of my notes now. I'm going to dive into a little bit of what we will continue on Sunday with, but Before we do that, let's take our break like we try to do at the end of the first hour, and we will continue on for probably another hour after this. So thank you for your time and attention, and we'll take our break. Okay, we are back. Sorry I had the music turned down so low. I know some of you were listening to it and enjoyed it, and I thank you for that. But I noticed when I came back that I had the volume turned way down on that music. Always seems to be a little something that I fail to twist and pull and adjust and make happen, but oh well. This is all amateur, one-man show, backed up by my wife. All right, so you guys can see and hear okay. Just let me know in the chat room before I start blabbing on again. Sounds like I can hear and see. Let me know in the chat room before I jump on. Are we back? Can you hear me? Yep, good. Thank you, Eileen. Alrighty, so what I'd like to do is jump over to the Thunderbolts site and give you their very short synopsis on exploring the electric universe. In the wake of recent discoveries, a new way of seeing the physical universe is emerging. The new vantage point emphasizes the role of electricity in space and shows the negligible contribution of gravity in cosmic events. Again, I'll remind you, gravity is 10 to the 39th power weaker than electromagnetism. Okay? Images returned by high-powered telescopes and recent space probes have challenged astronomers' long-standing assumptions about galaxies and their constituent stars, about the evolution of our solar system, and about the nature and history of Earth. The new discoveries also suggest that our early ancestors may have witnessed awe-inspiring electrical events in the heavens, the source of myths and symbols around the world. Today, magnetic fields are detected everywhere, even in the empty, so to speak, depths of intergalactic space. Magnetic fields cannot exist without causative electric currents. The naked electric force is 39 orders of magnitude, 1,000 billion times stronger than gravity. The visible universe is constituted almost entirely of electrically active plasma. In the 20th century, the pioneers of plasma science inspired a new school of investigation called plasma cosmology. Plasma cosmologists suggest that electricity is the primary force organizing spiral galaxies and the astonishing galactic clusters now seen in deep space. Plasma cosmology has achieved surprising success in predicting major discoveries of the space age. This new perspective does not require purely theoretical inventions based on mathematical assumptions like the Big Bang, dark matter, dark energy, neutron stars, or black holes. An electric universe extends the findings of plasma cosmology to the formation and evolution of stars and their planetary satellites. Stars are formed at the intersections of galactic current filaments in dusty space plasma. The size of a star and its color are determined electrically and may change suddenly. Nova and supernova are the explosive response of stars to a power surge in their galactic circuit. Proponents of the electric universe suggest that there are no isolated islands in the universe. All objects in space, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters, are connected by manifestations of the electric force acting in real time. The standard model of the sun proposes that pressure at the core of the sun provokes a thermonuclear reaction. Proponents of this model say that this thermonuclear furnace causes the sun to shine. The electric sun model, on the other hand, envisions thermonuclear reactions and neutrino production at or close to the surface of the sun, where the maximum exchange between the sun and its external environment occurs. It is electricity that energizes the stars, including the sun, in a form of glow discharge. This external power source explains why the temperature of the sun increases above the photosphere to coronal temperatures of 2 million degrees. Powerful plasma feedback effects maintain a steady output of visible solar radiation, while variations in power input show up in the familiar sunspot cycle. It is in the nature of a glow discharge that all stars possess a weak electric field beyond the corona. As charged particles of the solar wind move away from the sun, they continue to be accelerated due to the sun's electric field, which extends to the heliopause. Okay? So before I go on, let me just break that down a little bit. Number one, protons and other accelerated particles emanating from the sun and moving towards the Earth continue to accelerate in speed, rather than what you would think intuitively that they would slow down the further they got away from the sun. Now, that isn't necessarily because of the gravitational or electromagnetic attraction of the Earth that's accelerating these particles. This is occurring throughout the circumference of the sphere, radiating out in all directions from the globe, the spherical shape of the sun, not just Earth-directed particles. Okay? Again, the core of the sun is colder than the outer reaches of it, the photosphere. This is because the energy exchange that they were just talking about occurs in the photosphere, at the outer surface of the sun, if you will, because the energy that maintains the production of light and heat from the sun is derived from the cosmos, from the electrical charges of the plasma in the cosmos itself. It's drawing from outside. You may recall yesterday in the live stream, in the discussion of the Sapphire project, that once the negative cathode around the chamber, supplying the chamber with electrons, the copper cathode providing the electrons into the inner chamber towards the center anode, which is positively charged. Once the copper was consumed, there was still a drawing of energy, a drawing of electrons from the plasma itself, external and internal to the sapphire chamber. Again, modeling what the sun is doing in the cosmos. So we'll continue on here. Comets are electrically charged bodies moving on elliptical orbits through the sun's interplanetary electric field. As it approaches the sun, the comet's swift radial movement develops arcing on the nucleus. The arcs produce jets of dust and ions that form the coma and visible trails. Many comets are solid rocks with dry surfaces. The sharply defined features of comet nuclei make clear that they are not, and I'm adding to this, mainstream science. It says here, they are not, quote, dirty snowballs sublimating into the sun. Due to the electric force, a comet can entrain a mass of hydrogen from the sun greater than the mass of the comet's nucleus. The unexpected X-rays of a cometary discharge can reach 2 million degrees. Okay? So what it's doing when it says entrain a mass of hydrogen from the sun, the comet is actually magnetically drawing hydrogen from the sun itself in greater quantities than the comet's mass itself. This is why we see the tail as a comet comes closer to the sun. It's not a tail, as mainstream science wants to call it, as dirty snowballs. It's nothing of the sort. Cometary nuclei reveal deeply cratered and blackened surfaces due to electric arcing. Since comet nuclei are eroded electrically, they could not survive across eons of the solar system history and may have been produced much more recently than proposed in the Standard Model. In the recent history of the solar system, its electrical environment changed. Under changing electrical conditions, planetary orbits changed as well. Close approaches of planets led to powerful electric arcing between planets and moons. All rocky bodies in the solar system show the massive scars of these kinds of electrical events. Electric discharge scarring is occurring even now on Jupiter's closest moon, Io, and on Saturn's moon, Enceladus. Now, Enceladus was on the close final approach of Cassini, the probe. Enceladus was very closely monitored and photographed. Okay? Continuing, electrical activity continues on Mars, driving dust devils the size of Mount Everest, created by the electrical differential between the surface of Mars and surrounding space. That means oppositely charged particles. All of the dominant surface features of Mars show the patterns of electrical discharge, suggesting that in the past a vast quantity of material was excavated electrically from Mars. Electric universe proponents suggest that it was an interplanetary arc that created the Martian Valles Marineris, Valley Marineris, the largest known scar on a solid planet. Much of the rocky material exploding from Mars became comets, asteroids, and meteorites. Okay, so that's the synopsis from the Thunderbolts project. If you have questions, go ahead and prepare some of those, and we'll get ready to put those in chat, okay? Let's talk about the mainstream dogma of the Big Bang for a moment. Let's kind of present the opposite side. The expansion of the universe theory. And again, Thunderbolts researchers completely discount the notion of the expansion of the universe. And I'll probably detail some of that here and then continue it on Sunday. So from Wikipedia, the expansion of the universe. The expansion of the universe is the increase of the distance between two distant parts of the universe with time. It is an intrinsic expansion whereby the scale of space itself changes. Again, this is mainstream science. The universe does not expand into anything and does not require space to exist outside it. Technically, neither space nor objects in space move. Instead, it is the metric governing the size and geometry of space-time itself that changes in scale. So the metric is something to follow, to pay attention to here. In general relativity, the metric tensor is the fundamental object of study. It may loosely be thought of as a generalization of the gravitational potential of Newtonian gravitation. The metric captures all the geometric and causal structure of space-time being used to define notions such as time. So let me break that down for you. What they're talking about here is on vast distances, on large scales, is the application of this notion that the universe is expanding. I don't agree with that, and I'm going to give you my own personal observation. This is apart from Thunderbolts, but my own personal observation to the theory of the expansion of the universe is not so much that it has to be this metric of vast scales and distances at which the expansion of the universe can then be measured and theoretically proven, because we're part of the universe, are we not? If the universe is expanding and we're a part of it, why are we as physical beings, just talking about this from an anthropomorphic standpoint, why aren't we expanding? Why are not the atoms expanding in their orbits of their fundamental particles of electrons and protons and so forth? Why are not the molecules made up of the atoms? Why are the molecules not expanding? If this is an inflationary scenario, then we should be inflating. Okay? So they're hedging their bets by saying, oh, it only applies on the cosmological scale. Well, again, it's an example, I think, of talking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time, like they do about dark matter and dark energy. Okay? So let's continue with the dogma. Technically, neither space nor objects in space move. Instead, it is the metric governing the size and geometry of space-time itself that changes in scale. Although light and objects within space-time cannot travel faster than the speed of light, this limitation does not restrict the metric itself. To an observer, it appears that space is expanding and all but the nearest galaxies are receding into the distance. All right. It appears that space is expanding and all but the nearest galaxies are receding into the distance. This takes us to the redshift that was asked about 3 or 4 live streams ago. The redshift. Okay, I'm going to dig into my notes here a little bit. Let me see what I have here. I think I have something else I wanted to note for you. Going to my notes, where is this? There it is. Okay. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Alrighty. Let's put myself on camera here and read from my notes. The expansion model depends on the validity of the redshift. The redshift equals the distance is the assumption. NASA says that measurements of the galaxies and their light reddens as it passes through a stretching universe. They're saying the universe, the expansion, is stretching. The universe is stretching, which the scientists at Thunderbolt say the universe is not stretching. Physically, it does not stretch, is what the Thunderbolts is saying. The reddening, the redshift, and I'll define that a little more. The reddening is used to calculate how fast the cosmos expands with time, a value known as the Hubble constant. The idea of a stretching universe is non-physical. It makes no physical sense. Halton Arp, who was an astronomer and who was an adherent to the electric model of the universe, Halton Arp, A-R-P, he discovered the light from highly red-shifted objects occurs in discrete values. Now, for those of you that understand redshift, the idea of finding discrete values of measurement, discrete values measuring light from highly red-shifted objects, like a star system, like a nebula. Discrete quantities of light, discrete meaning finite, meaning clearly within boundaries of measurement of light. What this means is that in a stretching universe, in an expanding universe, you would not have discrete, finite, within boundaries measurements of light. That in the theory of the theory of Einstein's relativity, that light would change in its measurement due to the change in space-time. Space-time itself is a very nebulous label. Mainstream science cannot really clearly define what they mean by space-time, and yet they will continue to banty that label of space-time around to justify their theories. Space-time meaning that space is expanding and therefore time changes. Light changes. There are no discrete values, clearly definable within limits, values to light because it's stretching, and to time because it is likewise stretching, as in Einstein's theory of relativity, which is held up as the Holy Grail. And yet relativity, even Einstein was discounting as not the true definitive explanation of how the universe operates. In other words, Einstein was discounting his own theory of relativity, discounting gravity, and assigning it to the electric model, electromagnetism. Einstein was. But again, as I said earlier, that was swept under the rug by the industrialists for the sake of greed and control. Okay? So what does redshift mean? Let's go to Doppler. Doppler sound. If you have an object coming towards you that's producing a sound, now I used to be a paramedic, so let's use the example of an approaching ambulance with its siren activated. As the object comes closer to you, the wavelength, okay, the wavelength shortens. If you could see the wavelength of sound, if it was replaced with light coming towards you, the light would appear blue. The wavelength would shift to the wavelength of the blue color. The sound coming towards you, a siren approaching you, its wavelength is shifting. Okay? It is shifting to a shorter and shorter wavelength. Okay? I'm kind of abbreviating things here, so let me go through my notes. So when we talk about redshift, we have an object moving away. Object moving away from us, like an ambulance with its siren. The wavelength is actually going to decrease. That would, if it was visible, shift to the red spectrum, the red wavelength of light. That's a lower wavelength. If it's coming towards you, the wavelength increases. It shifts to the blue. So in the cosmos, in the dogma of the expanding universe, galaxies that are moving away from us as the observer, galaxies moving away from us, appeared that their wavelength of light coming from those galaxies is shifting to the red, lower wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum. So they're saying that there's a shift to the red, thereby saying that the galaxies are moving away. And they say that the galaxies moving away from us proves that the universe is expanding. And that there are very few galaxies moving towards us which would shift to the blue, a higher wavelength. What Halton Arp said when he found that light emanating from red-shifted objects, like a nebula, the light is measured in discrete values, meaning that they're not shifting, they're not changing. The values of the light in a red-shifted nebula remains the same. If the values remain the same, there's no shifting, there's no stretching, there's no expansion going on. What he said, his conclusion, was that it means there's something going on with the matter, the physical matter. There's something going on in the matter within the quasar or within the nebula. and it's not within space. Now, this hasn't been clearly defined since Art presented this. The testing hasn't been done to explain why these discrete formulas, these discrete numbers or readings of light being discovered. And that's because Halton Arp was ostracized by the mainstream science. So the ability to continue with scientific endeavors to explore these discrete findings has been stymied, has been suppressed. Another example, okay? Wanted to touch a little bit on dimensions because this comes up quite often, the discussion of dimensions. In the physical world, we have the Euclidean space. We have X, Y, and Z. We have up, down, okay, and depth. We have the upward, we have the depth, and we have the lateral. And those are physical representations of distance. Our three-dimensional measurements represent measuring actual physical distances. Anything beyond the discussion of three dimensions steps into the realm of theoretical, meaning it steps into mathematical models. And mathematical models are only theories. They don't describe, in other words, you can't take them off a sheet of paper, off the blackboard, the mathematics, those long computations, which is shorthand of axioms and fundamental laws that man has created. These are man-made constructs, man-made laws that are agreed upon by other men, axioms, foundational points that they all agree upon, and they use symbols to represent those laws, those theorems, even theories and axioms. It's a form of shorthand, so you don't have to write all those out. And they use those as their arcane calculus calculations on the board. But they remain theoretical because you cannot, when you're talking about mathematical equations expressing multiple dimensions beyond three, you cannot translate that theoretical representation mathematically into the physical. Can't be done. Yeah, the light is assigned as the fourth dimension. But you have mathematicians, which are theoretical mathematicians, saying that there is as many as 56 dimensions out there. And you have people in the quantum mechanics and quantum computing world, including Geordie Rose that I've mentioned many times, saying that they're accessing 2 to the 500th and now 2 to the 2000th power of parallel dimensions. It's all theoretical. It's all mathematical. There's no physical representation of these things. And yet it's accepted as dogma in mainstream science. It's like I referred to in a couple of issues ago in Entangled magazine, the cover art representing the flea circus. Oh yeah, I see the fleas. Yeah, the fleas are doing, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, everybody in the audience agrees they see the fleas because they're seeing things happening in the circus. Okay? It's a flea circus. It's all meant to justify the system that they have built, which was initiated by the greedy industrialists and the elite that wanted to control and create a serf class of humanity. This is why mainstream science continues to push the notion of the gravity model, to push the theoretical dimensions mathematically, And they dazzle, as I call it, dazzling and bamboozling the average layperson who doesn't understand calculus, doesn't know that this is shorthand representations of axioms and theorems and supposed laws, and just goes, oh wow, these guys are really smart. Look what they're drawing on the chalkboard. They must know what they're talking about. And so they don't question it. They don't apply critical thinking. And the poor people, young people that enter into programs on physics and science in general, but we're picking on quantum mechanics and particle physics here. As I said, they're indoctrinated. They're indoctrinated into that left brain, purely logical, purely analytical thinking, to the point where they can't break out of the paradigm. It's not their fault. They're subject to the system. And the system is self-perpetuating these lies. And this is why I stand up and I applaud the researchers at Thunderbolt's project, because they're going counter to the system. They are critical thinkers. They are using the right brain, right hemisphere, to think imaginatively. They do think logically, they do think from the left brain, but they also use the right brain in order to think outside the dogma and question what is being presented. Because most of what is presented in cosmology is nothing but theories, and yet it is presented to the public as laws and facts and proof and experiments and Nobel Prizes in science, all based on lies. And I mean that. They're out and out, flat out lies, because they can't be produced. They cannot be proven. You look at things like LIGO, the LIGO experiment, where supposedly they detected and therefore proved gravitational waves. Now, this is a whole nother discussion I'll have at another time. But it requires someone else coming along with exactly the same apparatus, reproducing their experiment to either prove or disprove their findings. But because you're dealing with a large apparatus, 2 kilometers long, connected to a likewise across the country apparatus, unless you have the funding, you can't reproduce the experiment. Now let's go to CERN. The findings, the prognostications, the declarations, the pronouncements of discoveries of new fundamental particles and new science at CERN, you can't build another Large Hadron Collider to test their statements. You have to take their word for it because there's no way to reproduce it. And they know this. And so they can come out with anything they want in their press releases to justify their funding, to justify their existence. Into the billions of dollars with CERN's experiments. So I'm giving you from 40,000 feet the big picture of mainstream science. Sunday I'll go into a little more detail in what I've given you a taste of here. I want to reserve some time for questions because I'm sure there are questions tonight. And I'm happy to take those. But let me finish by way of tying Saturn into CERN. Now, longtime listeners and readers of Entangle Magazine, you've heard me talk about where I'm venturing off into here. Let me bring up a graphic. Northern pole of Saturn, synchrotron, plasma clouds contra-rotating. Accelerated particles, just like they do at CERN, accelerated particles. Northern pole producing naturally occurring Birkeland currents. Plasma conduit. This is a cross-section of a very large Birkeland current. I've demonstrated that with these other graphics to you tonight. Capture this image. Think of this as CERN at the northern pole of Saturn. Okay? Now the southern pole of Saturn you have the end of the Birkeland currents, and I showed you the graphic of this. You have the spiral. And I'm sure when I mentioned this, people were thinking about the northern spiral over Norway, the Norway spiral, the spiral seen in the heavens, okay? Identical to the southern pole spiral at Saturn, okay? Again, this is the northern pole of Saturn, southern pole of Saturn. Here's your spiral. These are cross sections of the Birkeland current. Here's the cross section right here, as if you were cutting a rope and looking at the end of it, okay? I want to go back to another. Okay. I mentioned this donut shape, this toroidal field in cross-section on the cave drawing. The two circles are the donut cut in half and looking at the ends of the half circle. Toroidal field. This toroidal field, this donut, CERN has the capability of producing. Think of the bottom of this image here as the synchrotron of the Large Hadron Collider. Okay? It has contra-rotating particles moving at 99.99% the speed of light, just like the northern pole of Saturn. And picture this donut above the Large Hadron Collider's synchrotron, because that's what's produced. When you accelerate particles in opposite directions at near the speed of light, you are producing a toroidal field. These are magnetic lines of force. The toroidal field, the donut, are magnetic lines of force, visible when they are in the plasma. And moving up through the center of the donut, coming from the synchrotron, the ring, are the Birkeland currents, the twisted double helix of oppositely charged particles produced by CERN. The physics demand this. Just like I said, if you sent a probe to the northern pole of the sun, you would see the same hexagon, the same charged particle clouds moving in opposite directions at the sun as you do find at Saturn. The physics demand it. Likewise, the physics demand that when you create a synchrotron, you're producing Birkeland currents out of the center of it, and above the synchrotron you are producing in the plasma, the toroidal field, the donut shape. Now, extending upward with the Birkeland currents in this image, imagine that's the southern pole of Saturn. So let me go back to that image, because some of you are already way ahead of me, even though you may not have heard me say this before. I'm reaching back in time to some of my first presentations publicly, and longtime listeners know what I'm going to repeat here. My theory, my conjecture is this. One of the multitudes of applications of CERN's Large Hadron Collider, and perhaps equal and simultaneous in initiation, simultaneous in the timeline, to the opening of the doorway to the abyss from Revelation 9, the angels cast from heaven, given the key to the bottomless pit. Simultaneous to that opening of the doorway to the abyss is the electrical reconnection of Earth to Saturn. Now understand, all of the planets, including the Sun, all of the planets, including Saturn and the Earth, still are electrically connected to one another, because they exist in the plasma, which is electrically charged. It's a soup, if you will. The planets, including Earth, are all fully immersed in this soup of electrically conductive plasma. And therefore, the electrical connection between Saturn and the Earth that I described to you in the mythos of the golden age of Kronos still exists. It's weaker than what it was observed when they were in closer proximity, when Saturn and the Earth were in closer proximity. It was fully visible in the plasma of the sky. But since they moved further apart, it's become a weaker Birkeland current, but it is still there. Therefore, my conjecture is this. When CERN goes to full power in 2026, and they may do so sooner, they're never going to tell us the full story. It may happen before 2026. But when they go to full power with the new magnets, etc., that I've already explained in detail, they will have the ability to produce Birkeland currents magnitudes greater than what they have been producing. They're not revealing that they've already been producing Birkeland currents. When I mentioned the Norway spiral, my conjecture is that was an experiment by CERN that we were observing, almost as if we were observing the northern lights, the Birkeland currents. I have that image. I want to show you that again. This one. Birkeland currents naturally occurring from the Earth out into the cosmos. This is a plasma conduit. I think something very similar to this will be observed emanating from Geneva directly up through our atmosphere and out to the southern pole of Saturn, connecting that Birkeland current from CERN to this spiral at the southern pole of Saturn, reconnecting the two planets. Now, why? Again, this is conjecture, but why? Because if you look at people like Crowley, Aleister Crowley, and Madame Blavatsky, if you look at their writings, their manifestos, if you will, they talk about Saturn, Saturnalia, the worship of Saturn. They talk about, and they're not the only ones, but in Saturnalia, the worship of Saturn, in the belief in the actual mythos of the golden age of Kronos, they want to recreate that golden age. A golden age that in the myth was supposed to be a time of abundance, when Earth, Mars, and Saturn moved through the cosmos. Let me see if I can find that image for you.
Brenda was asking if we have Birkeland currents.
Who?
Brenda,
What do you mean? How do we?
do we have Birkeland currents? She was asking.
I don't understand the question. Do we? Meaning who? So we'll get to that in a second. So this is the representation of the golden age of Kronos, Saturn, Mars, and Earth together in the plasma envelope. This is what Blavatsky and Crowley and others have talked about returning mankind to this connection between the Earth and Saturn. They believe that this would return mankind to a state of utopia. Now, this isn't my idea. This isn't.
Look at the picture that's on the screen.
Yeah.
It's different than yours.
Why?
I don't know.
Well, it hasn't caught up. There's a delay.
Oh.
It hasn't caught up to the change. If you read Blavatsky, especially, more so than Crowley, she talks about returning humanity to the golden age of Kronos. This is where my conjecture leaps over to CERN, that CERN is furthering this idea, this notion of returning mankind to the golden age of Kronos. Boy, that thing is really slow. Kathleen's showing me her computer and showing me the delay.
You're almost a minute behind, a minute to
Let me say that on my screen, on my laptop, I'm showing this image, so something's happening at your end.
Of course.
Ask them in chat what image they're seeing. Are they seeing the southern pole of Saturn, or are they seeing the purple image of the golden age? We have some weird things happening over here, folks. And just before we go on, because it interrupts my train of thought, I want to make sure that we're okay. Purple image. So something's slow on your end there for whatever reason on your computer. It's weird. Yeah, I don't know. Let's move on. Let's move on. Okay, so Blavatsky, CERN, Golden Age, reconnecting the Earth in a more enhanced way by producing these Birkeland currents at CERN in order to connect to Saturn. So I'll just leave this image up. I won't mess with it too much. Conjecture on my part, but I think based upon reading of Blavatsky and understanding the physics going on at CERN, the synchrotron cannot, based on physics, cannot not produce Birkeland currents. It therefore can not produce, let me make it more clear, it has to produce Birkeland currents because of the physics. Likewise, the toroidal field, because of the physics involved in a synchrotron, which is exactly the same physics occurring at Saturn. Saturn, again, is producing Birkeland currents that penetrate from its starting point at the North Pole through the core of the planet to the Southern Pole. In conclusion, it seems to me that they will connect to the Southern Pole of Saturn at the same time that they open the doorway to the abyss. Now, you may leap forward with that and think perhaps maybe the abyss is Saturn itself. Okay? Here's a little tidbit for you to do some homework on. The core of Saturn is liquid hydrogen. Excuse me, not liquid, excuse me. It is metallic. Hydrogen is a gas in its typical state here on this planet. And out into the cosmos, it tends to just remain a gas. But because of the immense, not gravitational attraction, but the immense magnetic coalescing of hydrogen gas, it compresses through magnetism, its attraction. The gas, it compresses the gas down into a metal. Now, this has been reproduced in the laboratory. Metallic hydrogen in the laboratory. It's done under tremendous pressure in the laboratory. That's the core of Saturn, metallic hydrogen. So do a little research on that on your own. I'm just throwing that out to you. But the Birkeland currents are proven to exist in Saturn by looking at the northern and southern poles, the cross sections of Birkeland currents themselves, visible by the Cassini probe, photographed by Hubble. Okay? I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that the physics of CERN match the physics of Saturn, which they worship. CERN is all about Saturnalia. So more on Sunday. I'm going to go ahead and try to answer some questions. So what was Brenda's question? Was that clarified?
She was saying, do we have Birkeland currents? Meaning, I guess, humans? Do people produce Brooklyn currents?
You mean in our body?
Yeah.
In our body, do we have Brooklyn currents? Are you asking, is the Kundalini spirit of the Kabbalists and our chakras, our tree of life, is the Kundalini spirit, the serpent, twisted serpent, moving up through the spine of the human, is that a Brooklyn current? I think that's where they got the idea, is from the Brooklyn currents. Remember, it's always a counterfeit in Satan's world. It's always a mirror of God's construct. I don't think it's New Age to say that our spinal column passing electrical impulses through the spinal cord of the nervous system. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that, yes, we have Brooklyn currents passing through the spinal cord. And likewise, I don't think it's a coincidence, because God's design is not based on coincidence, that Brooklyn currents are a twisted helical configuration of oppositely charged particles, identical in configuration to our DNA, because our DNA electrically communicates information.
You know, she was saying if the DNA is changed, that would...
If the DNA is changed, the DNA is changed, in my viewpoint, by way of a third strand of DNA scenario that I've presented. Now, that's not a Brooklyn current. Those are nanoparticles that produce that third strand, which is artificial, an artificial construct. Okay?
Susan had a question.
Sure.
She was asking... before that, Melissa said, do Brooklyn currents look like wavy horizontal lines that are purplish and greenish in color?
Horizontal, they could be horizontal, and you have 2 points that are conducting Brooklyn currents. Certainly they could run horizontally. They can move in any axis, Brooklyn currents. You're talking about charge potential between two objects. Take the example I gave earlier of the comet and the sun. Here's a better example. It has been observed by astronomers of comets coming close to another comet, or a comet coming close to one of our planets, and before impacting, and this happened with Jupiter, and has happened with Venus as well, incoming comets, asteroids, they're comets when they have a tail, but an asteroid coming into close proximity with a planet, before it impacted, and this is where Thunderbolts project scientists were predicting, based upon the physics, predicting that before impact, that asteroid and that planet would exchange Brooklyn currents, thunderbolts, lightning. And that's exactly what occurred, because you have a difference in charge between the planet and the asteroid called a potential. And that arcing is that communicating of those potential charges by way of an electrical current between those two before the impact of the asteroid into the planet. And this has been observed and explains why you see cratering and why you see scarring, like on Mars. As I said earlier, on Mars, on the face, what is like a Grand Canyon, but on a mega scale. Grand Canyon scarring horizontally across the face of Mars. Well, that's due to the dragging of an electrical arc across the surface of Mars. And when you see cratering on moons and on asteroids. These are cratering that are identical to what happens when you take an electric arc welder, the stick, the electrode on an electric arc welder, and you hold it just above the surface of a metal plate, and an arc jumps from the tip of the electrode to the grounded metal plate, and it causes cratering in the metal plate due to the electric arc. And you take those images from the metal plate and you hold them side by side to the images of cratering on planets and moons, and it's identical. Passing objects, Birkeland currents, thunderbolts, electric arcing between the heavenly bodies because of oppositely charged poles, creating a potential that results in an arc. I hope that answered the question.
I'm sure it did. Susan asked, is reconnecting Earth and Saturn dependent on the alignment of planets? Is that kind of...
Yes, that's a question that was asked of me probably back in 2014, and it was added to by saying, did I have a timeline? Did I have a projection of alignments of the planet in which we could say when this discharge from CERN, from the LHC, would take place to reconnect with Saturn? And in 2014, I didn't have, and I still don't have, a timeline for that alignment. I would need to consult with astronomers on that, but perhaps stellarium, which is predominantly for stars and constellations, maybe we could get an alignment through stellarium software. But I've never really pursued it, and I'll tell you why. I don't like predicting timelines. I don't like giving timelines because it can cause fear and it can cause untoward, inappropriate behavior on the part of people. And I don't like having a finger pointed at me saying, oh, he predicted something was going to happen and it didn't happen. I've never professed to be a prophet, never tried to really prognosticate, predict the future, because it's fraught with problems and dangers. But also it's prohibited in Scripture. God does not want us to be predicting the future. So I've been very reticent in doing that. Is it possible that we could find a close proximity and alignment of Saturn to the Earth? Yes, it is, but I'm not going to go there.
Eileen has a good question. What force energy would have occurred to change the alignment of Saturn, Mars, Venus, and Earth to now be the orbits they are in?
Oh, you stole my thunder for Sunday. Great question.
Yeah, Eileen.
I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this because I have trouble pronouncing a lot of things. Catastrophe is the word, but it's catastrophism. Catastrophism, if you will. Catastrophe, but put ISM at the end of it. Catastrophism. This is the thunderbolts. This is the Immanuel Velikovsky Worlds in Collision discussion. This is central, beyond even the mythos of the golden age of Kronos with Saturn. This goes to a broader perspective of how the universe, but predominantly how the solar system that we have, came to be. This applies throughout the cosmos, but in looking at just our solar system, of our planets. Catastrophe. Rather than accretion. Accretion meaning the gathering together of substances, gathering of material. Mainstream dogma says that the planets came into existence by way of accretion. It's very much akin to the evolutionary theory for life on this planet, including humans. It's the evolution of the planets over vast billions and billions of years, they will say, of the gathering of dust. They always want to use dust. That's not very scientific. But the gathering of dust together over time, the coalescing of material resulted in the formation of planets. It almost sounds like you're in nursery school when you hear this stuff. It's comic book stuff. Accretionism, gathering, resulting in planets. Now to thunderbolts, to Velikovsky. There were catastrophes that resulted in the planets. So let's take Venus. There was a catastrophe of some type. It may have been a collision into Saturn. It may have been a sudden electrical potential discharge occurring at Saturn that then ejected material resulting. Let me go back to this image. I think it's important that we have something to look at. To explain this. Give me a second. I have to get this software to slowly but surely show me what I want. Come on. There it is. Okay, here's Venus. This is the Eye of Ra. Here's Venus and its comet tail, and here's Saturn. The theory is that there was an electrical discharge from Saturn that was so massive that it threw off material from Saturn, leaving a trail of material, but a more coalesced gathering of material that originated on Saturn that produced the planet Venus. And eventually this tail, which was visible by man and recorded on stones and recorded on cave drawings, recorded by the Egyptians, this cometary trail, this tail of Venus. Worlds in Collisions, the title of Velikovsky's 1950 book, is because there were collisions between massive asteroids in Saturn, massive asteroids and other planets that threw off material that resulted in the moons of Saturn, the moons of other planets. Even Pluto has moons orbiting it because of these catastrophic impacts of incoming asteroids striking planets, striking even moons, and producing the planets that we see today. That there were collisions between planets that occurred. And certainly there were massive, violent discharges of electricity, thunderbolts, between planets that would discharge material. So our solar system is a result of catastrophes, not the gathering over billions of years of this process of accretion of material. Okay? Now Kathleen just left the room, so I will check and see if there are any other questions in the chat room. So Eileen, I hope that answered your questions. These are impacts and discharges that produced our solar system. Okay? All right, are there any other questions? Let me see. I don't see anything else in chat popping up here. Okay. Yeah, a lot of homework to do. I agree. You know, I don't often recommend YouTube, but type into YouTube Thunderbolts Project. They have a whole series of videos. You can go to thunderbolts, and they have free videos posted there as well. Just go to their video tab. They do a very good job in layman's terms of explaining these collisions, these wars of the planets, these Birkeland currents, these thunderbolt discharges, what was seen in the alien, the ancient skies, okay? So what I've done is really tried to compress, and it took me all day to really go through all of the notes I've gathered over the years and really be able to compress this down into something that really was tangible, relevant, like I always strive for, understandable. Why is it relevant to our everyday walk of life? Well, gravity versus electricity, what's relevant is that they have obfuscated, as I love to say. They've hidden the truth from us. And so we're revealing the truth to you. And I'm doing that on the shoulders of all of the great research done by people at Thunderbolts Project and Monty Childs with his Sapphire Project. Because Sapphire is not only modeling the sun, it's also demonstrating the mechanisms of the cosmos in the laboratory. The sun is just their target. But what happens with the sun happens with everything in the cosmos. It's no different. It's not in isolation. So I've just tried to encapsulate it, make it very short and brief in the span of 2 hours. There are probably hundreds of hours of videos produced by the Thunderbolts Project. And they have conferences where they've presented their latest findings back in 2015, 16, 17. I didn't see one. Well, I think there's one available for 18, but 19 hasn't been made available. And, you can pay for, $20 or something for a download of their conference. Okay? So that's the overview. We'll probably talk a little bit more on Sunday about this. But again, the takeaway also is that they have pushed the Big Bang on us, and it's completely false. They've completely discounted in the mainstream, the electrical magnetic operation of the universe, because it represents the ability to deny the truth to us, to control us, to subjugate us, to dumb us down, to keep us from understanding what they're using. So here's my final comment. I've said this about what goes on at CERN, that they fully recognize that this is an electric universe. Electromagnetism predominates over gravity. They know that at CERN, plain and simple. Here's a touch point to prove that statement. It's the linear accelerator. That's the chamber of the linear accelerator is only 10 meters in length. The entire apparatus is 30 meters in length. It's a small in comparison to the 17-kilometer main ring of the Large Hadron Collider, but it's called the Awake Linear Accelerator. This is a plasma-based accelerator, plasma wake field, using waves that particles, protons, travel on the crust of the wave like a surfer and are accelerated from wave to wave. They are able to achieve in 10 meters 1,000-fold greater acceleration of fundamental particles. 1,000-fold greater acceleration in 10 meters greater than the 17-kilometer synchrotron ring of the LHC, using plasma, using electricity to accelerate particles. That's definitive proof that they know all about and that they are acknowledging the electric model of the universe at CERN. And that bolsters my conjecture that they fully intend to electrically reconnect using the plasma conduit of Birkeland currents, electrically connect the Earth to the southern pole of Saturn. I have no doubt and I've been saying this since 2012, the same scenario of CERN and Saturn since 2012 publicly. Okay? Alrighty. Susan says, I hope you can expound on primordial Earth someday. It's an interesting concept. Definitely, we will do that. Okay. Alrighty, guys. I think Kathleen's having some lagging issues with her computer for some reason. And we will go ahead and conclude. It's been 2.25 hours. I want to be respectful of your time. I hope this has been enlightening for you. We started with enlightening the show today with thunder and lightning. And your prayers against the elements, it stopped. It stopped almost immediately. It was amazing. It was beautiful. I think it was God just saying, yeah, you're going to talk about the electric universe. I'm going to send you a little bit of lightning bolts across your window as you start the discussion. Totally appropriate. Totally. Love your sense of humor, Lord. It's fantastic. Let's end with the scripture that I started with. Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for the fellowship that we have together. We have a wonderful time with you 3 times a week. Please let other people know about your experiences, and then I hope that they are informative and interesting and enjoyable for you. Lord willing, we'll talk to you again Sunday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Good night.